Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, guys, the news video here to discuss. We're going to start off by discussing the standings from the past couple of days after the past 3 days of game action. We're going to also look at some injury updates, waiver updates, and some trade rumors involving the Kraken, Red Wings, Flyers, Canadiens, Golden Knights, and Flames. We'll go to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Now before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never been able to do it without you guys. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below. And don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below discussing all we'll discuss in today's video. Now just like I said in my last video, with no game review videos over the next 2.5 weeks, I'm going to take a quick look at the standings here as of today's game action. So as of February 24th, 2024, the Boston Bruins lead the Atlantic Division with 80 points, followed by 78-point Florida and 72-point Toronto. 79-point New York Rangers lead the Metro, followed by 73-point Carolina and 67-point Philadelphia. Then you have 66-point Detroit and 65-point Tampa in the two wildcard positions. And they're followed by 60-point Washington, 60-point Jersey, 60-point NYI, 58-point Pittsburgh, 56-point Buffalo, 52-point Montreal, 51-point Ottawa, and 46-point Columbus. Those are teams that are outside looking right now in the Eastern Conference. Meanwhile, in the Western Conference, you have 76-point Dallas leading the Central, followed by 75-point Winnipeg and 75-point Colorado. You have 80-point Vancouver leading the Pacific, followed by 78-point Vegas and 68-point Edmonton. You have 66-point LA, first wildcard, 62-point St. Louis, second wildcard, and they're followed by 62-point Nashville, 60-point Minnesota, 59-point Seattle, 59-point Calgary, 50-point Arizona, 42-point Anaheim, 35-point San Jose, and 34-point Chicago. And those are teams that are looking at right now in the Western Conference. So lots of interesting stuff there. It's still really a logjam in the West for second wildcard position. The Central's still really tight. Edmonton and LA are breathing down Vegas' neck now. You've also got a really tight race for the top spot in the Atlantic. Carolina's not too far behind New York Rangers. On top of that, there's now a 5-point gap between 7th and 8th in the Eastern Conference, so I wonder if it stays like that, but the Devils, Caps, and Islanders all do have games in hand on the Bolts, so I do wonder if there's a little bit of being able to close the gap. So I'll have to wait and see exactly how that works out, but those are your standings as of right now. Going over to my usually scheduled portion of the video, going over to the waiver up the part of the video, we usually start with a couple of signings, but unfortunately we've already gone to all of the signings that have happened over the past couple of days, so we'll start with a quick waiver update here from the past few days. We had a few waiver updates to look at here. So first, going over to Colin White, we talked about him on Thursday. He was placed on waivers. At that point in time, we had not known the outcome of it. We said he was a decent bottom 6 forward, but he was signed quite late into the season. I think he was signed off of a PTO by the Pittsburgh Penguins. A lot of teams had a chance to sign him. I was expecting he probably clears. He's more of a depth player at this point in time for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and with them getting a little bit healthier. Didn't really need White at that point in time, so I was expecting that he probably winds up clearing, but he didn't. The Montreal Canadiens wound up claiming him, so a little bit surprised there. The Canadiens don't have a whole bunch of really good depth at this point in time. They moved Monahan, so that really tampered with their depth a little bit, so I can see why they would want White. He's a decent bottom 6 forward who can fill in really well in like a 4th line center role, so I'm not overly surprised the Canadiens claimed him, especially given the fact they have a couple of injuries right now and they trade Monahan, so they could use a little bit more forward depth. I'm still a little bit surprised given the fact that White was being able to be claimed off of waivers. I thought he probably would have cleared, so it's a little bit surprising to me, but given the fact that Canadiens lost Monahan, they don't have the best of depth. They've been having to call up some of the younger players like Gignac and Condada to play at the NHL level. I'm not too surprised about that, so we'll have to wait and see exactly how it happens there. The Canadiens did wind up claiming Colin White. Then 2 more players were placed on waivers on Thursday, and that was Brandon Gignac with the Montreal Canadiens. With the Canadiens now acquiring Colin White, there was no need for Gignac at the NHL level, so they moved him down to the minors via waivers. And then with the Bolts getting a little bit healthier and Chaffee having a really good stretch run right now, the Bolts placed Barre-Boulet on waivers. Now, Gignac played his first few NHL games of his career over the past couple of weeks. He looked good. I think he's also got 1 goal, but he's not a real NHL level forward at this point in time. The Canadiens are a team who needs forward depth, so given that fact, I was expecting Gignac to probably be cleared off of waivers. I thought there was a chance where Boulet could have been claimed. He's a decent bottom 6 forward. He's still not getting the opportunity I think he deserves in Tampa. I thought there could have been a team out there who could really use him as like a solid bottom 6 forward, but instead they both wound up clearing. So like I said, not too surprised about Gignac. He's more of an NHL player. The Canadiens brought him up after the Monahan deal. He got into a few games of NHL action, looked pretty good, but he's still more of an AHL player at this point in time, so not too surprised he wound up clearing. I'm a little bit surprised by Barre-Boulet. He's been placed on waivers a ton of times over the past year and a half. He was claimed at one point by the Seattle Kraken, but then the Kraken placed him back on waivers and Tampa wound up reclaiming him. So he's been in a couple of places so far, so I thought there might have been a chance that he got claimed again, but I still don't think Tampa's using him to the best of his abilities. But with them being a little bit more healthy right now, they needed to place some players on waivers, and Barre-Boulet does wind up being the one that placed on waivers. So interesting stuff there. I really did think Barre-Boulet would have been claimed, but instead he went to be being cleared off of waivers. So does Grzelyck, and both those guys can be sent down to the minors. So interesting moves there. And then yesterday we saw a player be placed in unconditional waivers, yet another guy, and that was Ruzicka with the Arizona Coyotes. Apparently there was an incriminating video of him, and not exactly sure what happened in the video. There was a really bad video that was put out, and that showed Ruzicka doing some really bad things, and that quickly after his contract was being placed in unconditional waivers for purpose of contract termination. So I'm not overly surprised with the stuff that was said about Ruzicka, if that's true, that he's being placed off unconditional waivers. It seems like it was pretty bad, and he's now going to have his contract terminated. So Ruzicka was a pretty good bottom six forward, really good younger type player, but after that video was put out, I think it's quite simple that he's probably going to clear waivers and be terminated his contract and become UFA. So after the video that was put out, I expect he probably wouldn't be able to be going back to the NHL for a time being. Maybe I'm a little bit wrong, but I would probably say that he's probably done his NHL career for a time being. But maybe eventually he gets back into the NHL, but for a time being, it looks like he's going to be cleared off of waivers. I would probably think you don't usually see players who are placed on conditional waivers be claimed, so my guess will be he probably clears and he goes back to being a UFA. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But quick recap here for waivers. Colin White, who I thought probably would have cleared waivers, did wind up getting claimed by the Montreal Canadiens, and now he's with the Montreal Canadiens organization for now. Then you have the Montreal Canadiens placed Brandon Gignac on waivers. The Tampa Bay Lightning placed Barre-Boulet on waivers, and both wound up clearing. I thought Gignac would probably clear. Barre-Boulet, I'm a little bit surprised, didn't wind up getting claimed, but still, he hasn't gotten into very much NHL action, even though the Bolts I don't think are using him correctly. I can see why not many teams would want to claim him. And then Ruzicka was placed on unconditional waivers for purpose of contract termination, and he's probably going to be UFA by the end of today. So it'll be interesting to see how those work, but those are your waiver updates from the past few days. Going over to a quick injury update from the past few days, lots of interesting injury updates. So we have Brett Howden, who was placed on injury reserve and has upper body injury and is out day-to-day, so bad blow there for Vegas. Matt Grzelyck has a lower body injury and is out day-to-day for the Bruins, so that's a horrible blow there. Matthew Tkachuk and Gustav Forthling both have undisclosed injuries and are going to be out for a day-to-day period of time, so bad blows there for the Panthers. TJ Oshie has a lower body injury and is out for a period of time for the Capitals. Hayden Fleury has an undisclosed injury and is out for a period of time for the Bolts. Nathan Bastian has a lower body injury is out for a period of time for the Devils, and not surprising there, he got absolutely decked by Matt Rempe in the Devils-Rangers game, and then he got into a fight with Jacob Trouba too, so he got banged up in that game. And then Travis Konecny has an undisclosed injury and is out for a period of time for the Philadelphia Flyers. So some really bad injury updates there. But then we also saw Logan O'Connor in Colorado, Scott Peronovich in St. Louis, Blake Lizotte in LA, Panarin and VC in New York, Achari in Pittsburgh, Lauko in Boston, Lagesson in Toronto, Fashing in NYI, and Forrester in Philadelphia all be cleared to play, and they've either already gone back into game action or should in the not too distant future. So that's really good news there for guys like Forrester in Philly to get back, Panarin in New York, Achari in Pittsburgh, Lizotte in LA. Really good stuff there, but bad news to see guys like Oshie go down with an injury for now, with Bastian to go down with an injury for now, with Howden to go down with an injury for now, and especially Tkachuk to go down with an injury for now. It's a horrible blow for the Panthers, and hopefully those guys can recover and are not going to be out for an overly long period of time, but still, those guys are going to be out for a little while, so some pretty bad blows there for those teams. But those are your injury updates there from the past couple of days. And lastly here, going over to a couple of quick trade rumors from the past few days. Now, I'm going to start today's video off by discussing a couple of things that was discussed in the 32 Thoughts podcast with Elliot Friedman. So we're going to start here with the Detroit Red Wings. Now, according to Elliot Friedman on that 32 Thoughts podcast, he thinks that there's a very likely chance that Yzerman, with the way that the Red Wings have played so far, with the way they're positioned in the standings, they may be willing to go for it and move a couple of pieces to improve that team. He does think that there's a very likely possibility that that's something that happens. He says that they did this twice in a row now, where they improved in the offseason to sort of make their team a lot better. He says if they did it for 1 year, it was just to sort of have some stopgap options for their younger players to continue to develop in the minors. But if you do it 2 years in a row, you want to go for the playoffs. And the Red Wings are in a pretty good position right now. They're at 66 points, 6 up on the Devils, Islanders, and Capitals. Unlike the Bolts, they, I think, have the same amount of games played. I think the Capitals may have 1 game in hand on them, so there's no games in hand being used on them. And the Red Wings in the past couple of weeks, I think even month or two, have been absolutely phenomenal. So after a really bad stretch, they're in a pretty good position. As much as they do have a ton of pending UFAs, such as David Perron, Daniel Sprong, Patrick Kane, Shane Gostisbehere, James Reimer, it does seem like they might go for it, and I could see them try and add. Now, I've seen a lot of people say they should add on the blue line. I would not be opposed to that. The Red Wings don't have the best of blue lines. They have Sherratt and Wallman, who's a really good top pair. And then you also have a couple of decent other guys like Gostisbehere, Mata, Petrie, Sherratt, Hull, but none of them are really legit top 4 defensemen. I mean, Sherratt and Hull are really good third pair defensemen. Same with Mata, same with Petrie. Gostisbehere can be a really good 4, but he's not a 3 on the Red Wings team, so I could definitely see him going out of defenseman. I would not be surprised if they were in on guys like Noah Hanifin, maybe Chris Tanev, maybe Sean Walker. I think they could definitely look at added defenseman, if not a top 4 defenseman, then a depth defenseman to try and improve their defense even more. They could look to add maybe a goaltender. Now, Lyon's been absolutely fantastic this year for the Red Wings. You also have James Reimer, who's been really good. They have Ville Husso, who's been in and out of the lineup due to injuries, but it's been pretty good when he's been in. So I do wonder if they try and add a goaltender. But on top of that, they could also add another forward. And Elliot Friedman does think that they would be a really good fit for a guy like Jake Guentzel. Now, I'm not exactly sure if that's really the most impressive need that this Red Wings team has. They have a couple of really good pieces on that team. They have a really good forward group right now. If they add Guentzel, though, that would make them a legit and scary top end forward group. So I would not be overly shocked if they went out and go get Guentzel. Now, they have the pieces that are apparently required to pull off a Guentzel deal. Now, according to a lot of people, they said they want a first, a third, and a really good prospect. The Red Wings do have a couple of really good prospects. Could they include a guy like Willander, who's in the minors? Would they be considering moving Edvinsson? I don't think so. They have a couple of guys in the forward group too. Berggren's been a name who's been mentioned for quite some time as a potential player who they could move. They, I think, would be open to moving their first round pick if it was to help them get someone, and a third round pick. I think that if they were to trade for Guentzel, they would have to do it with an extension too. So it'll be interesting exactly to see. But they also have David Perron, who's in an expiring deal too. So if they could get Guentzel and extend him to be a solid second line left winger, that would be a fantastic addition there for the Detroit Red Wings. But I'm not exactly sure if that's the major upgrade that they really need. So after they wait and see exactly what happens there. But according to Elliot Friedman, there's a very likely chance the Red Wings will probably add. I would think it'll probably be on the defensive end. I think they could definitely benefit from being a top 4 defenseman. But according to Elliot Friedman, they could be a really good landing spot for Jake Guentzel. If they can move like a first, a third round pick, maybe a prospect like a Berggren or a Willander, I think they have a really good chance at getting a guy like Jake Guentzel. If they can get an extension with that too, it'll be interesting to see if they will be able to do that. But keep your eye on the Red Wings. It seems that they are going to be a team who's going to try and add before a trade deadline. Next, going over to the Seattle Kraken, Elliot Friedman did mention them as well. He said that there's a very likely chance that the Kraken, who are currently hovering around the playoff mark, as much as the Red Wings are in a playoff spot, there's no guarantee the Kraken are going to make it. They're currently tied with the Flames for third runner-up in the Western Conference at 59 points. They are 1 back of the Wild, who are at 60, 3 back of the Preds, who are at 62, and 3 back of the Blues, who are at 62, who are in that last wildcard spot. So they're going to need some help to try and make the playoffs. They're going to need a really good run, plus some of these teams slipping a little bit. Now, I don't think that's overly unreasonable to think, but I do think that there's a really good possibility that the Kraken do possibly miss the playoffs this year. So if that's the case, could they move a couple of pieces? It does sound like Elliot Friedman does agree. However, he does think that they'll take one more run at Jordan Eberle before they consider possibly moving him. Definitely, it does seem like Eberle is a really good piece and a really liked piece in that Seattle Kraken organization. He's a really productive piece too, and I think they would love to keep him. But once again, as we've said before, their team was on the outside looking in, and there's a very likely chance I could see them move him. Eberle would be a hot commodity around the NHL trade deadline, being a solid top 6 right winger. So I definitely do think there's a very likely possibility that he could get moved, but it does sound like, according to Elliot Friedman, they'll try and take at least one more run at him before moving him. They also talked about Alex Wennberg on the 32 Thoughts podcast and said that he's also another guy who could definitely be moved. Now, I don't think they'll be bringing back Wennberg after this year. Jeff Merrick brings up a really good point, saying that Wennberg's spot, second, third line center, is Shane Wright's spot long term, and I would expect Wright to be an NHLer as of next year. So I could definitely see Wennberg be moved. And on top of that, there's a very weak center market right now. So if Wennberg goes in there, there'll be a lot of teams interested in a guy like Wennberg, who would be a fantastic second or third line center. So a team like Boston or Colorado Colorado, who are looking for that sort of a center, would have a ton of interest in Alex Wennberg. So I think the Kraken could have a really good return for Wennberg, and I don't think he's coming back, given the fact that I think they want Wright to have that spot next year. So if I'm the Seattle Kraken, if I can sign Eberle, sign him, try and keep him in the lineup. If I can't sign him, I'll probably move on from him. For Wennberg, I'll probably try and see if I can get the best offer possible for him, and I just think that Wennberg and Eberle are most likely going to be gone by the trade deadline. So I'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But they do think on the 32 Thoughts podcast that Wennberg is a very likely trade candidate to be moved, while the Kraken may take another run at Eberle and try to re-sign him before moving him. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But with the Kraken still 3 points out of the playoff spot, and with a logjam of Western Conference teams trying to make the playoffs, there is a very likely possibility they could try and move those guys. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Now going over to the Philadelphia Flyers, on the Insider Trading video on TSN, Darren Dreger was talking about the Philadelphia Flyers, saying how they have a lot of interesting pieces, and he was mentioning a guy like Nick Seeler. Now, I've mentioned Nick Seeler before. He's a guy who a lot of teams could definitely look to covet before a trade deadline. It's a very likely possibility, but he just thinks that it's not a guarantee that Seeler gets moved, and we talked about this before. He says that there are definitely contract talks going on between Seeler and the Flyers. They really do like him. They're sort of weighing the option of right now what it would take to sign Seeler right now. My guess would be he would get like a 2 to 4 year deal somewhere around there with an AAV of like $1.5 to $2.5 million. That would be my guess if he was to sign Philadelphia. So the weighing the option now of signing him to a new contract extension or possibly moving on from him. So it seems that they're really just seeing it doesn't make sense to trade Seeler, or if it doesn't make sense to trade Seeler, unless they're going to get an absolutely extremely good return, then why don't they sign him? So it seems that they're sort of hovering around that right now. There's a lot of people out there who think that Seeler will get extended, me included. So I do think there's a very likely chance Seeler gets extended. I still think Walker gets moved. I still think there's a very likely chance Scott Long gets moved. I think both those guys are probably on their way out of Philadelphia. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens, but it does sound like Seeler and the Flyers are talking about an extension, and there's a very likely chance that the Flyers do wind up keeping him. So we'll have to wait and see exactly where that goes over the next couple of days, a week or two. But it does sound like Seeler, if they can't find an extension that works, and if it doesn't make sense to sign an extension, then it would seems like Seeler could definitely be dealt. But if there's not going to be an overabundance of interest in the market for Seeler, then expect them to definitely try and sign him. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what direction the Flyers go over the next little while, but my gut instinct tells me they'll probably sign him. Going over to the Montreal Canadiens, apparently the Canadiens are shopping young defenseman Jordan Harris. Now, I find this a little bit surprising, not too surprising as well, given the fact that the Canadiens have a really lethal amount of prospect blue liners. They have Logan Mailloux in the minors, they have David Reinbarker over in Europe, they have Lane Hudson over in the NCAA. Those are three of their top four defensemen going forward. You have King Gooley, Arbor Xhekaj, Jordan Harris. You have Matthias Norlinder, who's also there. You have James Struble. There's a huge amount of defensemen there for the Montreal Canadiens, young prospect defensemen who are going to be NHLers at some point, but they can't all play for Montreal. Sort of the same logjam that the Kings have with their forward group, that the Buffalo Sabres will eventually have with their forward group. There's just too much talent and not enough spots on that team. So basically, with the guys like Lane Hudson probably going to be over before the season ends, Ryan Bacher probably getting a shot at the NHL level next year, Mailloux probably being maybe a year away, there's a very likely chance that they're going to try and look to move Jordan Harris before a trade deadline. It seems like they've made him available, and they could be open to moving him. Now, Harris is a really good player. He's actually been playing pretty well over the past year and a half, ever since coming in. He's definitely looked really, really well, but given the fact they have Xhekaj, Gooley already up there, they have veterans like Matheson and Savard, they're going to need some more spots for Hudson to come over after the trade deadline, after his NCAA season is over. I think there's a very likely chance we could see a Jordan Harris trade. What they would want for the Jordan Harris trade, my guess would be another young forward, maybe not someone who's extremely talented right now, but someone who has some upside and could be definitely a solid top 9 forward and is on the younger side of things in their forward group. So that would be my guess as to what they could get for a guy like Jordan Harris. I don't think they're looking for picks at this point in time, given the fact they already have a ton of picks, and like we said, they already have a ton of prospects in their prospect pool. So I think they may be looking for another couple of younger forwards. So interesting stuff there for Montreal, but that's not they're shopping a guy like Jordan Harris. Harris, then we could see a Jordan Harris trade before a trade deadline, and I wouldn't be overly surprised about that fact, given the fact of their really good depth on the blue line and their prospect pool. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how it happens there. Going over to the Calgary Flames, LA Freeman was talking about Noah Hanifin again, and he mentions 4 teams who could definitely have some interest in Noah Hanifin. Now, he mentions that these are to varying levels of degree, and he doesn't know if all of them could pull off a Hanifin trade given their assets. We've heard this a couple of times over the past little while from a couple of different sources too, but he does say that Tampa, Boston, Florida, and Jersey all have interest in Noah Hanifin. Now, I've heard Hanifin's name be linked to New Jersey for quite some time. We know the Devils have a really banged up blue line right now. With Hamilton out right now, that blue line's really suffering. So I could definitely see them go after the defenseman, go after a guy like Hanifin. And unlike some of these other guys, I could see Hanifin be commanding a first-round pick plus from the Devils. They have their first or second-round pick this year. They gave a conditional first to San Jose. I'm not exactly sure if the conditions have been met or not. They also do have a really good prospect pool, unlike some of those other teams that I mentioned. So they can move a guy like Daniel Monsieur or Villan or Foote or Holtz on their prospect pool to try and acquire a guy like Alex Holtz. I think it's a very likely possibility. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But the Devils have been linked to Hanifin. The Devils have once again been linked to Hanifin. And I think that they probably stand the best chance to acquire Hanifin given their assets they have. You know, for Boston, Florida, Tampa, those three have one thing in common. No first-round picks for this upcoming season. Boston's is in Ottawa, Florida's is in Philly, and Tampa's is in Chicago. So with that being said, it does seem like they'll have to try and figure out some creative way of making a trade work. Now, the Bolts don't have their 2025 first either. Neither do the Florida Panthers. Those two have already been traded. The Bruins do have a 2025 first, so they could try and package that. But would the Flames really want a first-round pick a year or two down the line for Hanifin? I'm not exactly sure if that's possible. They do want a first round pick though, so Elliot Freeman does mention that these teams may have to try and move some things off their roster if they're going to try and add a guy like Noah Hanifin. Now, he mentions Eric Chernak in Tampa. I definitely think that's a possibility, but I'm not going to say it's a guarantee. Chernak's actually been a really good top for defenseman. He's signed on a longer term deal. I'm not exactly sure they want to move him. I think they would only move him if it was a possibility that they could get Hanifin extended, which has been talked about as a possibility. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but I'm not exactly sure if Chernak's the right move to be moved for a guy like Noah Hanifin, so we'll have to wait and see on that. On top of that, Florida, he mentioned a guy like Anton Lundell. Now, I highly doubt that the Panthers would move a guy like Lundell in order to acquire a guy like Noah Hanifin, but I do think they have a couple of decent prospects like Samoskovich, like Devine. They have a couple of decent defensive prospects, so I do think they could intrigue Calgary. So as much as they don't have a first round pick, maybe they move a couple of seconds and a decent prospect. Maybe that's sort of what happens, and maybe that's sort of what intrigues Calgary. For Boston, Elliot Freeman does mention that they're looking for a forward, they're looking for a defenseman, which could be a Hanifin, but he also mentions that they're probably looking at this point in time to move pieces off their roster to acquire some new pieces. So they mentioned Allmark on the 32 Thoughts podcast. It doesn't seem like Calgary would want Allmark, given the fact they already have Markstrom, Vladar, and Wolf. So if they're moving Markstrom, they want Vladar and Wolf to be their two goaltenders. So I wouldn't expect Allmark to be a guy who could possibly go to Calgary, but I could see other guys go to Calgary, mainly a guy like Brandon Carlo. If they were to add and extend Hanifin, like a lot of people do think Hanifin will be open to doing so and going to Boston, would they be open to moving Brandon Carlo? I think it would definitely be a possibility. He's signed on a longer term deal, he's a little bit younger, and I think he could be a fantastic fit for a guy like Calgary. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens, but it does sound like as much as the Panthers, Bruins, and Bolts have interest, it may be a little bit easier for them to move a couple of younger pieces off their roster rather than trying to move a first round pick, which you don't have. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens, but Elliot Freeman does mention Florida, Boston, Tampa, and Jersey as teams who have some interest in the guy like Noah Hanifin, and he says that they may have to part with some of their younger players instead of draft picks and prospects if it was to get the Noah Hanifin. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. And last year, going over to the Vegas Golden Knights, on an insider trading video on TSN, and as well as on the 32 Thoughts podcast, they were mentioning Vegas and Mark Stone's situation. Now, they think that Mark Stone has a very likely chance to be out for the rest of the season, at least the regular season. He has a spleen injury. He's going to be out for probably at least the next month, maybe in 2 months. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how long it'll be. But Pierre LeBrun does think that there's a very likely chance that there are a couple of situations out there right now that could wait till the deadline. He says that Sergachev in Tampa, it sounds like it will definitely be out until the regular season at the very least. Dougie Hamilton, like we've talked about, it sounds like he'll be out until the end of the regular season. And it sounds like Mark Stone has a very good chance of also being out for the rest of the regular season. However, it does seem like Arvidsson in LA and Hampus Lindholm in Boston are only going to be out for a week-to-week period of time and be back before the end of the regular season, so they won't get cap relief for those two guys. But it does seem like Tampa, Jersey, and Vegas will get cap relief. Now, I know a lot of people will say cap circumvention. Maybe it's possible, that's a possibility, but I'm not going to say it's a guarantee. I mean, Mark Stone has had a really bad hit injury history. Is it possible cap circumvention if he's potentially going to be out until 2 weeks before the playoffs and then he's magically healthy at the start of the playoffs? Potentially, but we'll have to wait and see exactly how that situation plays out. Maybe he's out for the first few games of the playoffs. That's a possibility too, but we'll have to wait and see exactly how that works out. But they were both talking, both Elliot Friedman and people on Insider Trading were talking, and they said that there's a very likely chance that the Vegas Golden Knights do use as much of their cap as they can. If the Stone is going to be out, they maximize as much as they can, and there's a very likely chance they will be trying to add a couple of pieces. Now, I'm not exactly sure if they should add on the blue line. They have a really good blue line, however, they have had some injuries this year, so I'm not going to say it's a guarantee that they don't look at the blue line, but I think it's a little bit less likely. They have a really good goaltending tandem in Hill and Thompson. I think they'll probably just keep that, but I could see them add a middle 6-4. They have a really good forward group, but it's a little bit lacking compared to last year, and I do think there's a very likely chance they could try and go after a couple of guys. Now, I've seen them being linked to a couple of guys. Vlad Tarasenko in Ottawa is one of them. He would be a fantastic like third or second line sniper for the Vegas Golden Knights, so I could see them look to try and acquire him. A couple of Penguins who have been linked to the Vegas Golden Knights have been Riley Smith, former Golden Knight. A lot of people do think he would be a fantastic addition getting back there if the Penguins are going to be sellers, and if the Penguins are able to retain a little bit of money, that would be a fantastic addition there for the Vegas Golden Knights, getting him back. So maybe they look to a guy like Riley Smith. Another guy in Pittsburgh who I think they've been linked to is Jake Guentzel. If they can have the Penguins retain 50% of his salary, look for the Golden Knights to be in on him. I think they'll be open to moving a first-round pick, a third-round pick, and a decent prospect for a guy like Jake Guentzel. So I have to wait and see on that. There's probably a couple other guys. I could see him target a guy like Anthony Duclair in San Jose. I could see him target maybe a Jordan Eberle in Seattle. I could see him target maybe a guy like Yakov Trenin in Nashville. I don't think they would be willing to pay the asking price of Buchnevich, but maybe that's a possibility too. Could they look to acquire a guy like Frank Vetrano? There are definitely a couple of cheap options there for the Vegas Golden Knights who I could see wind up being of interest to them. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how that works out. But it seems like the Stone will be out for the next little while. It does seem like it's quite likely it could be until the playoffs, and it seems like they have interest in guys like Smith, Guentzel, and Tarasenko, and they wouldn't rule out guys like Duclair, Eberle, and Vetrano. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. What do you think about these things? Does Vegas acquire a forward using Mark Stone's LTIR money, or will Stone keep healthy before the regular season ends? Definitely want to hear your thoughts on that. And who do you think the Golden Knights will acquire before a deadline? Do you think that Hanifin gets moved? What do you think is the most likely option? Is it Florida, Jersey, Boston, Tampa, or someone else? And if so, what do you think the trade package will have to be? Love to hear your thoughts on that. What do you think about Harris? Does he get moved by Montreal Canadiens? What do you think about Seeler? Does he get moved by Philly, or does he resign with Philadelphia? What do you think about Seattle? Do they move Eberle, or do they resign him? Do they move Wennberg? Love to hear your thoughts on that. And what about Detroit? Even though they have a lot of pending UFAs, could they add a guy like Jake Guentzel? Could they add on the blue line? Definitely love to get your thoughts on where you think Detroit will add, and do you think they will add before a trade deadline? Love to get your thoughts on all of that. But that's what I'm going to talk about for today. Don't forget to stay tuned for March 8th for my live trade deadline videos. I'm going to be doing it on early March 8th, so don't forget to stay tuned for that. But that's what I want to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're to subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I'll never know the truth of you guys, so if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below, and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below discussing all I was discussed in today's video. Also a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so if you check that out, leave a link down in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.